Welcome back to the workshop, everybody. So glad you could be with me here today. Walter at the workbench. So, it's been cold here. It's a little cool in the workshop. I'm at about 45, 48 degrees. I'm too cheap to push the heat up when the temperature drops outside because it just keeps running and running and running. So, I'm okay. But I haven't posted a video in a while, and I was a little unmotivated until I read a comment from somebody who was having trouble hand planing when it ends up being high on one end, square in the middle, and high on the opposite side. Okay, here's how I would approach that. Number one, check to make sure your registration face is flat and has no twist. If your registration face has twist, your square is going to register against that face and that twist is going to be there. Okay? That's number one. Number two, you need to check your body English. And I'm sorry if you're not English, but what do I mean by body English? It's your presentation of the plane to the work. And I will exaggerate. If you're planing an edge, I'm not talking about a surface, I'm talking about an edge, and you're skewing the plane to where this front corner touches to begin with and the back corner touches to end with, what you're doing is you're skewing the plane. That could cause a problem. You can get highs and lows. The other is your wrist, your hand-wrist memory muscle. So that's a matter of practice. That's a matter of setting up time to practice, laying out your wood to be planed and practicing. Now, those would be my first things I want to check. Am I presenting myself to the wood properly? Am I picking up and holding the plane properly? Am I presenting it to the wood properly? Okay? Now, mechanically, the physics of the tool, there are three things to check. Number one, you want to check and make sure your plane blade itself is sharp and it's either dead straight across or you've got a little bit of camber off to each side. You want to make sure that the frog itself is properly positioned to where it will give the blade the ability to be square to your work. All right, so those two things being perfect. And what do I mean about camber? Well, camber is if I take the blade over to one side, I'm getting a partial shaving. If I go to the other side, I'm also getting a partial shaving, and that is feathering out to both sides. What that does is that makes sure that my center is a full-size shaving. All right? So, if you've got your frog in square, you've got your blade sharpened and cambered slightly, or straight across, if that's what you choose, that's fine, because you will not leave plane tracks here. But cambering the blade gives you a little bit of ability to square up your work. Now, I had this problem with one plane that I was restoring. I'd have a high spot here, a high spot here, and square across. So I went through everything, cleaned, polished, shined up. Everything was square and everything was set. And I had already lightly flattened the sole. But I kept getting those highs and lows. And I'm using the plane just like I use all my planes, where I start out with pressure on the front. My index finger acts as a guide. I'm putting the center of the plane right over the board. And then as I get near the end, this pressure is off, and I have pressure now with my backhand, and that finishes the cut. Well, after a long, long time, I turned around and I re-flattened the sole. I flattened that sole until it was perfect. Now, it wasn't this plane, it was a different plane. I flattened the sole until I could get it as flat as I could in my shop. It made the world of difference when jointing. I think it was a number 5 plane, because the number 5s work really well. But none of this matters which plane you use. I can use my woodies. The process is the same. Notice where my hands are. Fingers guiding the bottom, thumb on the top, fingers wrapped around here, thumb here, pressure here. This steers the plane, this guides the plane. But I'm still square to the wood. Okay? Taking a heavier cut with this jack plane. Let's see if I threw it off at all, just throwing those shavings around. Okay. I did. I threw it off a little bit. So, now I am high over here. So, practice. Put some lines on. Now this is how you square it up. You bring your plane over so that the edge of the plane, where there's no cutting edge, is actually riding on the wood. And you take a partial shaving off the high side. All right, take a second one. Now move over. Take a third. Go down the middle. And bingo, we're there. So that's all there is to it. If you're having trouble with the warp, make sure your registration face that you're testing is square and flat so that you can transfer, so you can test square and flat. If that's not flat, everything afterwards is just not going to be accurate. Sometimes it doesn't need to be perfectly flat, and sometimes this doesn't have to be perfectly square and straight. It's relative. But if that's what your goal is, you need to start out flat. Check your body presentation. Okay, if you use the knob, you can do it that way too. Pressure down, come in, release the pressure. Okay? You want to guide the plane, use your finger like this. Guide the plane. And make sure your blade is straight and properly exposed out through the mouth, through the bottom of the plane. And finally, make sure the bottom of your plane is at least flat enough to give you decent results. It doesn't have to be microscopically flat, just flat enough to give you the results you want. Hey, listen, I hope this was helpful, maybe useful, maybe entertaining. But how about you head out to your shop? Go make some shavings. Oh, there goes the heat. Time to go in. Head out to your shop. Walter out.